Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brenda Gabriel from the Kwantlen Nation, located in our unrelinquished, asserted, and sovereign land of present-day Fort Langley, in what we now know as the province of British Columbia. My ancestral name is Qualachwiston, which was bestowed on me by elders from the Musqueam, Katzie, and Kwantlen Nations, while we were called to action to help protect the burial site of the ancient Musqueam settlement known as Seznam, that belonged to our Hunkamanam-speaking peoples in what is now known as the Lower Fraser River Delta. My name comes from the ancient and shared settlement of the Musqueam, Katzie, and Kwantlen peoples, known as Kakate. You know it as North Surrey, near Scott Road, and directly located below the south side of the Patello Bridge. Our people were violently removed from that site in the early 20th century to make way for the CN Rail. The area is now a site of industrial wasteland, so to speak. Despite that, it is the continuing work of the Kwantlen people to assert that territory. It is of intrinsic importance to our people because it actually is an ancient burial site. The word Kakate means resting place. The ancestor whose name I carry was a direct descendant of a very famous Kwantlen chief named Waddlekanum. He spared the life of a very famous person known as Simon Fraser when his expedition traversed the river that would eventually bear his name back in 1808. Our chief was also directly related to two well-known chiefs. One was Chief Capilano from Musqueam, and the other was Swanisset from Katzie. My name comes from their bloodline, and the Kwa in Qualachwiston means to speak. So the person who carried that name was a speaker on behalf of their community, and that is why I was bestowed with that name, because of what I do about my work as a speaker and artist. So it is with utmost respect and responsibility that I carry such a name, and that I am here today to speak not on behalf of those nations other than my own implicitly, but it is with a profound respect for those nations that I must choose my words wisely and offer nothing more than an additional voice to what those communities must already contend with in issues related to their own sovereignty and place in the echelon of great hereditary lineages and the continuing efforts by those nations to mitigate and thwart colonial usurpation of our lands and resources. As Andrew mentioned, I had embarked on a journey across the province by canoe. In 2014, an international group of citizens embarked on this journey from the shores of my nation and the Kwantlen Nation on the Fraser River, and we traversed the Fraser River Delta and traveled northward to Prince Rupert by canoe. We had traveled over 1,200 kilometers along our beautiful coastline, and we visited 14 communities. 12 of them were First Nations communities, and the purpose of our mission was to raise awareness, but also to it doesn't say it officially in the promotion of that event, but it was to protest the Enbridge pipeline that was being proposed in the territories further north. As I mentioned, my involvement, I think, from a social perspective and activist perspective in my community, didn't begin until my kin in Musqueam were protecting their ancient burial ground burial ground of Cesnam from development. And there was a call out to artists at that time to come and to make work that was asserting land and asserting territory in those spaces. So it was at that point, because of my kinship connection to my Musqueam family, that I sprung to action and I became involved. And I think it was from that point on that my passion in my heart really was about protecting our land and from the onslaught of colonialism. And then that energy was rekindled again when Kinder Morgan was knocking on the doorstep of Burnaby Mountain, and the protests that had occurred there were taking place. And again, there was another call to action for people to go to that space, to occupy it, and for a lot of my indigenous kin, like the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish, to assert their land and assert their territory, to protect it from resource exploitation. And that energy was rekindled yet again when I found out that Kinder Morgan was actually planning on developing their pipeline through my territory, through the Kwantlen territories, which are located in present-day Langley, British Columbia. And when I seen the old pipeline, where they were intending to expand it, was directly through Kwantlen land. And Kinder Morgan had actually approached our nation in offering their community gifting. I don't know what it was called. The community gifting. That's a nice way to put it. The bribes. Attempted to bribe us with a paltry sum of cash in exchange for allowing them to develop their pipeline through our unceded and unrelinquished territory. We refused, and we organized 2 rallies and a march through Fort Langley. The first time that our people had ever undertaken such a endeavor in a conservative, rich locality, and I think in organizing that event, I think a lot of people, were taken aback that we weren't just being passive about this development that was being shoved down our throats, that we were taking a direct approach in addressing the matter, and that we were fully prepared to do whatever it took to protect our land and our resources, not just for us, but for our future generations, in such a way that also compelled many of our neighbors who are not Indigenous, who are settler, to come to our side and to support us. And the sheer number of people that we managed to bring into the foray, I think surprised a lot of conservatives. Which was, I think at that point, it was a big turning point in our community, politically, socially, but also intergenerationally. A community that has essentially been at ground zero of the colonial endeavor. For those of you who don't know, that Fort Langley was the first capital of British Columbia. So this idea of nationhood and this colonial provincial idea was set forth and set in motion in Fort Langley. And the Proclamation of British Columbia was also signed there. And I think for a lot of people, their vision of the Kwantlen people was of a passive one. With that march and that rally at that time, it really showed that we were disinterested and not wanting to be part of that ideation of who we were and who we are. Which brings us to where we are now. Our position with regards to pipeline developments in our community are still the same. We do not intend to stray from our asserting our authority on our unceded and unrelinquished territories. and that looking at developments south of the border, such as Standing Rock Sioux Nation and the fight that they are undertaking right now, that we are in full support of their endeavor, and that I think I don't really have to get into what actions we will take right now, but I can say that we do support it. And given the current political state in America and Canada, I think there's a lot to be discussed. I think there's a lot of ideas that need to come forth. And based on the literatures that are out there with regards to the political sphere, in my mind, the only way that we're going to make any movement or any progress with regards to mitigating these problematic stances that these governments take is that there has to be some radical ideations that come forward that are palpable and that our people are willing to do. And notwithstanding, I know I'm not in an auditorium with a sea full of people today, that our audience in-house is really limited, but I would say that the general feeling that is across this land is that people don't like what's happening right now. And I have to believe that what we are doing is important, and that our actions that we are doing now will set forth much needed changes that we need for our present and our future generations. ECM.
Thank you, Brandon. Is this working?
Yeah, it works well.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brenda Wilson John. I'm of the Gitxsan Nation, which is in northern British Columbia. I presently live in Prince George, which is the gateway to the north, and I am working as the Highway of Tears coordinator for the last 2 years. Prior to those 2 years, I advocated for missing and murdered women. And the reason I did that was because my baby sister, who was 16 years old, was murdered in Smithers in 1994. In 1994, she was missing for 10 months, so we had no idea where she was. We had no real assistance in trying to find her. There was nothing out there. There were no manuals on how to, what to do when you're looking for somebody that's missing, who you should contact. So we were doing that basically by instinct. We did what we could at the time with what we had. Some of the resources that we had were almost nil. Our posters were black and white that were photocopied from a photocopy machine, and we put all those posters around our community, and we had to use a fax machine to fax them out to the different communities along Highway 16. At one point, we were using a message machine that still had the little tape recorders in them to receive messages. That was our little setup that we had. So if people had information regarding my sister, that they could phone this phone number, and we would hear their messages so that they could send it to us anonymously. So that was as high tech as we got. There was no internet at the time, so the information that we had about my sister couldn't get out there quickly enough. The assistance from the RCMP at the time was quite negative. we had we didn't have a really good relationship with the RCMP. My mom was a single mom, and she had 5 children that she was raising on her own. She had no vehicle. She was on social assistance. At the present time when my sister went missing, she was going to school and she was starting a new career and preparing herself for that, because she always wanted the best for our family. My mom was one of the many Aboriginal people that went to the residential school. She went to the Lujak Residential School in northern British Columbia. And when she went there, she was 5 years old, and she was taken away from her family. Many of our young Aboriginal people, when they went there, they lost a lot of their culture. They were abused sexually and physically. A lot of them went hungry, so there was always that need for overindulgence of food. So when my mom had children, she ensured that we were never going to go hungry, that she was going to do everything in her power to keep us happy. And throughout our lives, we always celebrated our birthdays. We always celebrated Christmas, and we always celebrated any event that she could make us happy. You know, life was a celebration for our family. So Ramona's last birthday was February 15th, 1994. And we had a wonderful celebration because it was her 16th. We were stigmatized as a dysfunctional family just because my mom was a single mother. And, you know, my brothers did get into a little bit of trouble here and there with the law. And that's why we didn't have that good relationship with the RCMP. And from the past, when my mom was taken away to residential school, it was the RCMP that enforced that. So there was never, ever a good relationship from past history. So when we tried to report Ramona missing, one of the comments that we received was, maybe she needed a timeout. Maybe she needed to be away from you, from her family. That's not something you want to hear from the authorities when we were a close family. And it was out of character for my sister to not phone or not get a hold of my mom, because she always got a hold of her to let her know where she was. So it was disheartening to hear that from them. And so we took it upon ourselves to try to find her on our own. We tried to reach out to our community. There were only a few places that actually assisted us. There was no process on how to find somebody that's missing or is murdered. Because 4 years prior to my sister going missing, there was another young lady that went missing, Delphine Nicole. And her mother was faced with the same things that we were facing. And she was also an Aboriginal girl. So this is the second time going around with my sister of a young Aboriginal girl going missing in our community, and nothing was being done. So our family took it upon ourselves to bring awareness about my sister, and we started this walk in June of 1994 to bring awareness that she was missing from Smithers. We walked and we did rallies in our community, we did vigils. We tried to do fundraising events in our community to raise an award, a missing reward. One of the things that we were confronted with was our mayor at the time, our town council decided to do a fundraiser for Melanie Carpenter in our community of Smithers, which is like way up north. Melody Carpenter is from around this area. They had it on the same night that we were having our fundraiser dance. That showed, the racism that was within our community at the time. 10 months later, my sister's remains were found out at the airport in Smithers, just behind the airport. It was really difficult for my mom and for all of us to accept that she was gone then. We had to go to the police station and identify her belongings, her clothing. To see her clothing like that displayed on these brown pieces of paper, and they were, you could tell that they were in the elements. The colors all bled into each other. My sister was found in a shallow grave. Whoever put her there actually knew that area. They knew the place that they were going to bring her. It was a beautiful place. Even though it was a burial area for her body, her remains, I thought it was really beautiful. My brothers and myself dealt with the pain through alcoholism. This is what we were taught. We were taught how to deal with pain through alcoholism because that's what my mom learned. For 11 years, I remained sober, addiction-free, to do the work that needs to be done. I needed to be strong, and I needed the rest of my family to be able to follow in the footsteps of being a strong nation by staying away from alcoholism. My children, all three of them, are alcohol and drug free after we've taken the steps to remain that way. So those are some of the factors that we are faced with, we are stigmatized with, that we are dirty Indians, that we are drunk Indians, that we are uneducated Indians. But all those facts are untrue because we've broken that circle and we continue to break that circle today. Just in the last couple of months, we've had to deal with a court case of murder, and it took 3 years for that family to finally get a conviction and a sentence. Even though they went through the sentencing and the murder is behind bars, that pain is still there for them. They lost their little baby girl, and the person only received 11 years of manslaughter. Unjustified for that family. And 2 weeks ago, we've had vicious, brutal assaults in our communities with young girls and men just beating the crap out of them and leaving them for dead. Some of the things that we do within the Highway of Tears is to support those families, to give them some hope that we're going to be there for them. We're going to stand up for them. Just as we did with my sister. Nobody knew who my sister was. Everybody put all of the cases on Highway 16 into one basket and said they were high risk. They were involved in high risk activities. Some of these young ladies were walking home. Some of these young ladies were walking to school. You know, we're not going to put up with that anymore. And the thing with the public inquiry is that we need to ensure that these cases that are unsolved right now, they need to be solved today. We can no longer sit back and let this continue. We need programs in place, such as the bus service that is finally being implemented after 23 years. That's how long my sister has been when she was murdered. There are many factors that need to be included. We need to be able to look after those families that are going through that grieving process. We need to look after the children that have been left behind of the missing and murdered. The healing needs to begin. Many of these families are left in limbo. And I'm really honored to be able to do this kind of work, knowing that our nations are behind us. Because when we did the Cleansing the Highway walk, it was the same thing as Brendan described. They welcomed us into the communities. They provided us with food and shelter. And they told their stories. That was the best part of the whole walk. Was many of these families were able to tell their stories of what they were dealing with, because they never had that opportunity before. And that's a part of healing, being able to do something for your loved one, whether it's being in honor of them, doing a ceremony, doing the walk, doing a vigil. Our families feel they need to do something. They don't want to be sitting back and not doing anything about their loved ones that are missing or murdered. And they're very adamant in it. And they're starting to build strength because they know we're behind them. So I'm very honored to be here today, and I thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you.